Welcome to another edition of We're Gonna Run It. I'm Joe Lisi, joined by former National Coach of the Year, Terry Bowden. Coach, we have been breaking down week number 3 on the horizon. There's some great top 25 battles that we're going to get to in just a little bit, but just want to get your thoughts about where we stand in the middle part of the week, some of these top 25 battles, teams that have to step up to really make a statement in week number 3.
I mean, that's right. I really don't think we think we know, but until you watch the teams play this year, and then when you can see them play somebody that's in their league, it's against somebody that's at the Power Four level, you get a better idea of what you're dealing with, what their strengths and weaknesses are. Because I think we're filling out a lot of these teams, and now they're getting into their conference. They played a big game, but they played some lower level teams. And now we're getting an idea of what these teams look like this year, not what we thought they would look like this year. And I think it's kind of interesting now because we've got some great matchups, and it's going to be a great weekend.
It really is. And I think when you look at certain teams that have conference games like Clemson, a team like Florida that have to potentially, step up, especially in road type of environments, they have an opportunity to erase basically what happened over the past couple of weeks for Clemson, lackluster efforts.
Right.
They're 1-1. And for Florida, they're coming off a disappointing home loss to USF. Now going on the road in a tough environment against LSU, they can erase that immediately with a conference win.
Joe, that's right. And that's a great example because that game is critical for both teams because not only can Florida turn it back in the right direction, but LSU could go in the opposite direction. Now that they have Florida and Florida got beat by South Florida, if LSU were to get beat like last year, now that takes all the momentum they've had going and it moves it in the opposite direction. So it's fluid. It's the way the season goes. I think I'm as much fascinated this year with the SEC and how difficult it is to determine which team is really on top, in the middle, or on the bottom because it's a tough league from top to bottom. And some of the schedules for Florida and some of these other teams, it gets bad. Every week it's a top 25 team.
It is. And I think one of those teams that you and I are in agreement with is Georgia, but they have a very difficult road test in Tennessee. We'll break that game down a little bit later. But, the outcomes of these games, to your point, Coach, really will dictate conference odds, national championship odds. And to your point, we're not going to know anything about Alabama if they cover the 20.5-point number against Wisconsin, right? It's not that much of a measuring stick if they beat Wisconsin, a team that they dominated last year in Camp Randall. We'll know where the Crimson Tide are once they start conference play, and we'll have a better gauge about potentially where Georgia, LSU are before we will Alabama.
That's right. With Alabama, after what happened against Florida State, I mean, it was going to be Georgia before we knew something, before we were willing to accept something. Because even Wisconsin is a mid-level Big Ten this year, and Alabama just destroyed them last year, and likely they'll win by 2 or 3 touchdowns this year. And it won't tell us enough about what we need to know because you have to compare them. It's like when we do the SEC odds for who the top teams in the SEC. You better beat those teams are the top 4 or 5 in the league because those are the ones you don't want to get a game behind when it comes for you winning the SEC championship or getting to the championship game. So it's getting interesting now. And again, there are some games that are bigger than others and some not as big, and some that affect the conference championship game and others that'll affect the college playoff situation, but they're not always the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be joined in just a few moments by former Notre Dame standout running back Reggie Brooks. Notre Dame squares off against Texas A&M. We've seen some fluctuation in that movement of the line. Notre Dame at one point yesterday was a 7.5-point home favorite. Now we're seeing 6.5s across multiple books. So we'll get Reggie's take about where CJ Carr is, where that team is coming out of a bye week. And I asked you this yesterday, and I still want to get your take about, what coaches can implement potentially in a bye week, especially coming off a top 10 loss like the Fighting Irish did, right? It was a back and forth affair. It was a 4-quarter game. They lose it on a last-second field goal. What can Marcus Freeman do just from an emotional aspect to get this team up and ready for this game Saturday night in South Bend?
Well, early in the year, it gives you 2 or 3 more days to work on the game plan for Texas A&M. Late in the year, you're resting people up, you're getting people well, you're trying to get a little bit away from the toughness of game after game after game. At this point, when you're Notre Dame and you lost a tough game to Miami, and I don't know that you dropped that much in the minds of what people think about how good you can be, but to me, at that early game, I was going to do something extra. I had 2 or 3 days to change that game plan, to work extra hard on what the other team does, a little bit of preparation. And most coaches will tell you when you got a couple of extra days to prepare for a team, you're going to be better prepared for what they do and what you want to do to attack that team. So it definitely advantaged to Notre Dame when they had that week off.
Now, I want to bring this up as it relates to Notre Dame because I got into this discussion this past weekend. This, to me, is a make it or break it game, big picture for the Fighting Irish. And let me break down their schedule. I want to get your take.
Right.
So they square off against Texas A&M this weekend. Texas A&M right now ranked 16th in the poll. They're a 6.5-point dog. If they were to lose this game, and I'm talking about Notre Dame, they would then be 0-2. They would then play on their schedule Purdue, Arkansas, Boise State at home, NC State, USC, okay, Boston College, Navy, Pitt, Syracuse, and Stanford. There's no way, I believe, if they lose this game, that they could then all of a sudden make it to the college football playoff at 10-2. Do you disagree with that? Because we saw them last year.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, because then the schedule, well, as a coach, you're glad to say, gosh, I should line up favored against those games. But when you're talking about making a playoff and you've lost your 2 games against ranked teams, it goes against you. Yes, they should be favored and probably should win. I don't know quite how good yet Southern Cal is this year on that schedule, but they may be back to where we think of Southern Cal. But right now, I think that could hurt. When you lose your first 2, I think it would be a tough road to hoe for Notre Dame to get back in the hunt. It was 2. Now, last year they lost that bad loss to Northern Illinois, but they won every single game. But it was like week 9 or 10 before we started buying into their credibility. It was at the very end that they got that back. 2 losses early could be devastating for a team that doesn't have a conference championship game to play in.
I agree. And so, like, the argument or pushback with that, coach, is going to be, well, they played in the national championship game. So if they start 0-2 and run the table, we know they don't play in a conference championship game. They're peaking at just the right time. And the committee with the brand recognition will say it's Notre Dame, we'll put them into the playoff. I don't know. Last year, yes. This year, you come right out of the gate with all this optimism and expectation. To your point, you start 0-2. I don't care if you beat Arkansas. I don't care if you beat Boise. The luster is gone from that point.
Well, and the way with the portal transfer and NIL, people are changing teams. These teams aren't the same teams they were the year before. Look what they did to Florida State 2 years ago. When they lost their quarterback, they did not vote them into the playoffs because they said this is not a good team. Without that quarterback, this team can't compete in postseason, and they didn't even take in consideration what they did the first part of the season. Now, to go back to the season before, I think we're getting further away from that as rosters change, quarterbacks change, and teams completely change the makeup from who's on the field from the year before.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see how this game plays out. I told you I like A&M. I don't like how A&M is playing on the defensive side of the ball. I do not. That defense was much more sound in run support when they squared off last year. They had Stewart, their star defensive end. I understand it's new pieces, but this defense can't give up 24 points to UTSA. No. They can't get abused by, opponents like that and expect to shut down Jeremiah Love and the front 7 and offensive line of Notre Dame. Just can't happen. So, again, we'll see the defensive effort that Elko plays up against CJ Carr, because you would think if you're taking the 6.5 or you're taking the 7, and I'm Texas A&M, I'm going, I have 2 games under my belt. I shook off whatever ring rust I have, and I have a defensive-minded head coach that maybe can confuse CJ Carr somewhat. Let's not forget, last year was Riley Leonard, veteran quarterback,
Right.
Even though they're playing at home, you got to believe that Elko dials something up different defensively.
Yes, and I think what I have a hard time explaining to non-coaches, we all approach those games against the mid-majors, the group of 16, differently. If you're a defensive-minded head coach like Elko, you may think of 17 points or say 3 touchdowns and 2-point conversions as 21 points. Once you're that far ahead, you don't worry. Now, if you're a guy, I mean, Lane Kiffin may say, no, no, no. I want beauty points. I want to score, score, score. Every coach has a different personality. The more you play against them, the more you know what their thought process is. Do I sit this guy? Do I not play this guy? How do I go into this game? All I want to do is win and move forward. People may doubt me right now, but it'll straighten back out when we start beating good people. Now, I don't know if that was the reason they did not play well against Texas San Antonio, but that's very well the case. I know the way I dealt playing with a minor league, not say a minor league, a mid major team or a group of 6 team. I quite often played differently against them, just knowing that I could win because I had too many big SEC games to play down the road.
Absolutely. We'll wait for Reggie Brooks to join us. I just want to bring up a couple of statistics about A&M, about how they're playing offensively. They're running the football with Le'Veon Moss, Marcel Reed playing very clean with the football. They're averaging 171 yards on the ground. This A&M offense, though, is throwing it as well, Coach. 305 through the air. You talk about Marcel Reed, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. That's what you want to see out of your sophomore quarterback, right? He showed glimpses last year. The consistency wasn't there from week to week, but that's a pretty good recipe to go up against that Notre Dame defense. And I told you as well, if they play man-to-man coverage, Freeman decides to go man-to-man with Texas A&M, that could be a long day. Prop-wise for Marcel Reed, he could break contain. He could kill you with his legs.
Well, because anytime you play too much man-to-man, and we'll talk about a little bit more when you talk about a Tennessee and Georgia and why Georgia always plays well against Tennessee, you get in trouble a little bit when you play man all the time. Like you say, the secondary turns their back, and if you create any lanes in your pass rush, you can't stop the quarterback. They're going to have a field day. So some guys have to have their eyes on the quarterback and spy them and pay attention. So you got to make sure you mix up your coverage. And if you want to make sure, you got to have somebody playing zone back there or spying the quarterback so he doesn't hurt you like Marcel Reed can hurt you, because he really can hurt you. Just like DJ Lagway did for Florida until that last game. He changed the entire possibilities of that football team, of the nature of that team. And I think that's what Marcel Reed did for Texas A&M last year. And like you said, if they'll just play defense like Elko can play defense, they're going to be a team to be reckoned with.
Absolutely. And I said Marcel Reed, 66% completion percentage, 509 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions, playing very clean. We only have one game or a body of work for Notre Dame. That was the loss to Miami. They do have a week of preparation. I think that's why you're seeing them as a significant favorite in this matchup. We'll break it down a little bit later in the show when Reggie Brooks does join us. The other big game, and you mentioned it, Georgia and Tennessee. Let's dive right into it, because the one thing for me, when I look at this game, Georgia and Tennessee, yes, let's give Tennessee the edge at quarterback. Aguilar over Stockton, right? He's battle-tested. He's mobile.
Right.
But when we look at identity, I believe that Georgia has bounced back identity-wise, offensively at least, rushing for 214 yards per game, physical offensive line, defense is playing sound, and we know about the dominance. They've won 9 straight, but listen to these numbers. The last 4 games against Tennessee, 20 points per game. The last 4 in Knoxville, Coach, they haven't beaten them. They have abused them. They've won those games by an average margin of victory of 31.5 points per game. These games haven't even been close. I love Georgia here.
I do too, because this to me about Kirby Smart being a nemesis to Josh Heupel. The style of play that he knows how to play Josh Heupel. You think back to 2022 when Tennessee was scoring points on everybody. I think it was 23-17. Georgia goes up and beats them and holds them to 17 points when they're scoring about 40 a game because of the style. He's going to play too deep. He's going to play deep so you don't get the deep ball. He's going to be strong enough defensively up front so he doesn't have to load the box to stop the run, and that way he can play zone to stop any deep throws, but he can slow down your running game by having good people up there. And then when he gets on offense, he's going to try to control the clock, control the ball, and run the ball. That's the formula that he wants because he knows that how to beat Josh Heupel. And that's how they've been beating Josh Heupel. And until Josh can figure out Kirby Smart, Josh Heupel's always going to be playing second fiddle to Georgia.
Now, I will say, if
Yeah.
Georgia can't run the football, right now we believe they can. They're averaging 214. Now, that was against Marshall and Austin Peay.
Right.
Tennessee is an SEC caliber front seven. They're only giving
Absolutely.
up 76 rushing yards per game. You talk about this Tennessee secondary giving up 220 in the back end. We saw Angeli game one. He attacked them. He had some success. So if the rushing attack is there for Georgia, work off of play action. Could be a big day for Oscar Delp. Could be a big day for those wide receivers, Zachariah Branch. Georgia has talent. It's just that in the first two games of the regular season, they've been a little vanilla with the game plan. I think that's good for Kirby because he wants to see if that offensive line is physical. He got that with the rushing attack. Now let's open it up in a game that matters as opposed to showing everything. Do you feel similar that he really didn't show a lot offensively out of Gunnar Stockton and the passing attack?
Well, he's kind of a veteran coach. He's very confident and comfortable in his position there at Georgia and how he fits. He would have no problem just beating somebody comfortably, not bad, not demolishing a lesser team. He would be very comfortable doing that. But I want to go back to what you said because you hit it on the head for Georgia. If they don't run the ball well, I think all bets are off a little bit for Gunnar Stockton because you look at last year when they could not run well. Carson Beck couldn't control the situation. He would make bad interceptions. He would make bad decisions because they were always playing behind the ball, behind the chains. They were playing in long yardage situations. Now you take a Gunnar Stockton and put him in that situation, they got problems. Now they got and all the other questions are not answered. But right now, I still believe that Kirby Smart against those teams, lesser teams, he's much more comfortable with a 13, 17-point lead because he knows how the game's going and he knows that other team can't get a first down hardly, and he's very comfortable. But different people, that's a different deal. If you're playing Baylor like we saw against SMU, 14 ain't enough.
No.
You got to keep scoring. But if you're a great, talented defensive team, those mid-May, you got to be careful what you read too much into those group of six opponents.
I agree with you. And again, I'm with you. The rushing attack will dictate everything. I still believe in Georgia. We've seen the line movement and went from 6.5 down to 3.5. We're seeing some buyback now at 4.5s across multiple books, including FanDuel here in New Jersey. So I like Georgia. I'm rolling. I think they're the most complete team in the conference. This is an opportunity to show that. Again, I believe that Georgia's the most complete offense and defensive lines. That doesn't mean that Aguilar's not the upgrade over Stockton, but that's why they play the games. I will say, and I told you this the other night, it is the lowest spread in the series. So think back to this. The lowest spread in the series was 2 points over the last 10 years. That was back in 2015 where Georgia laid 2 points. They lost the game outright. The following year in 2016, we saw a similar spread, 3.5. That was the game, Coach. I don't know if you remember the Josh Dobbs Hail Mary against Georgia. They lost it on the last play of the game, 38-31. So, that's what we're dealing with here. It is the lowest spread in the series since 2015, 2016. So that just shows you, I guess the book is buying in to Aguilar. They're buying into the home field with Tennessee. But you and I both like Georgia. I'm standing by it.
Yeah,
it is intriguing, though, to see how this plays out.
Let me say this about Aguilar. He's shown to me to be accurate. He's got the arm. I don't think Georgia's going to give him that deep ball. If you look back to what they did to Tennessee, even in 22 when they had the quarterback hooker, Aguilar's got to throw dig routes, got to go to 16 to 18-yard crossing routes. If they're playing too deep and playing deep, his accuracy has got to be shown in that middle bit, in the middle route, the middle lanes, the deep dig routes. If he can be accurate in those, that's going to give them the chunk yardage. It's going to help their running attack, and it's going to force those safeties to get back up there and jump those intermediate cuts so that deep ball comes. So I think it's going to have to, Aguilar's going to have to be able to throw the intermediate cuts against Georgia, because they're not going to give you the deep ball off the bat. They're going to play strongly up in the middle, and they're going to take away that deep ball, because they've had some quarterbacks that weren't great. I mean, Nico was not great accuracy on those intermediate routes, and I think that's what they're seeing. He never could hit them, and people did, and he in fact he didn't hit enough of his deep balls like Hooker did. And so I think what we'll see with Aguilar, we're not necessarily going to see that deep ball they want to run. That's what Tennessee wants to run. They've got to hit some of those 16-yard crossing routes, because those safeties are deep and the linebackers are up tight to stop that running game without having to overload the box.
Yeah, and you look at Tennessee's wide receivers, Matthews and Brazil, 22 receptions, 320 yards. They have had multiple touchdowns. We'll see if they could do it against this Georgia secondary. That will be the matchup. I'm not so sure that Brazil and Matthews are as elite as Jalen Hyatt and those wide receivers for Hendon Hooker just a few years ago. I think they've lost a little. Squirrel White now has moved on. And I think that's where Tennessee could be a little light or inexperienced entering this matchup. So we'll see how that plays out. But let me bring in, because we discussed, Coach, the battle in Notre Dame this coming Saturday. If you're going to talk Notre Dame, you got to bring in one of the greats for the Fighting Irish, the standout. Reggie Brooks joins us. Joe Lisi, Terry Bowden. How are you, Reggie?
Doing well. Sorry I'm running late. I'm on Central Time, so I got a little twisted up there a little bit. But I'm doing well and ready for the Irish to take on the Aggies.
Absolutely. Now, Coach and I watched that game against Miami. We both thought that C.J. Carr performed lights out for a freshman, making his first career start. You know, he did make plays in the second half of that matchup. What's the pulse around Notre Dame? They've had a bye week now, and Marcus Freeman entering this matchup with a top 25 opponent in the Aggies and their former defensive coordinator, Mike Elko.
I think they know they have to be more physical. The game against Miami was won in the trenches, and they've got to be more effective running the football more than anything else. You got Jeremiah Love, you have Jaden Price, you have a lot, Jadarian Price, you have a lot of weapons back there around. And I will say this, I'm not a fan of C.J. Carr running. He makes me nervous because he takes shots that he shouldn't take, and we can't afford to get that young man hurt. I love his presence in the pocket. We have to do a better job of protecting him, but you protect him by running the football and giving him some opportunities in the downfield passing game. And I was really shocked that we didn't do more downfield with Malachi Fields. I just didn't understand why we didn't take some shots downfield.
Yeah. Well, to me, and Reggie, this is Coach Bowden, Terry Bowden here, and good talking to you. I remember you well at Notre Dame with Coach Holtz. And in fact, 93, my dad played you. You were gone, I guess, when my dad played Florida State, played Notre Dame. That was my first year at Auburn. But you know what? I felt the same way. It's almost like you were listening to our show. We were saying, we need to see Jeremiah Love. We need to see that running attack. I thought C.J. Carr, he has the poise of a quarterback. His family background, when I watched it, this guy's going to lead Notre Dame to a lot of great wins because he has so much poise. But I agree with you. He's not going to beat you running like a dual threat quarterback and to dump the ball. But to me, the key for this week is that running attack and getting that ball into the hand of those guys so that the quarterback doesn't have to throw it in predictable situations.
I couldn't agree more. I just think, like I said, C.J. Carr, he's a good in terms. The most important thing to me, I always look at for a quarterback is their accuracy. You know, he does a good job. He places the ball well. I just think don't put him in situations where, like you said, it's predictable and they can pin their ears back and come after him because, his job is to disseminate the football. And I always say this, people, get on me, but like the GOAT at the quarterback position was the best game manager of all time, and that's Tom Brady. He wasn't going to wow you with his athleticism, but he's going to be accurate with the football. He's going to put it where it needs to be. He's going to read the defense, keep his eyes downfield, and not look at the rush. He's going to and get the ball to the playmakers. So, I think, that version gets overlooked because everybody wants the exciting big arm quarterback that can, have the rocket arm and can run like crazy. No, give me somebody that understands the game, knows how to read defenses, and can control the clock and get the ball downfield and get the ball into the hands of the playmakers.
Let me take you in a different direction a little bit, because I know with Notre Dame, Texas A&M, big game against two top programs. We've already seen Ohio State and Texas and Michigan and Oklahoma. Your thoughts on these big intersectional games from different parts of the country, and what was your big one? Was it Southern Cal? What was that one that y'all looked up to as the game that we look to every year?
Well, we had a couple. It was Michigan and USC. Those are the two games. Early on, you wanted to, you're going to see Michigan, and again, grinded out football, very physical brand of football. And USC was a little more California ball, as it were, a little more up tempo. Throw the ball around, but you knew you were going to get speed was going to be impacted in that game. So I love those intersection rivalries. I think we need to do more of those, but with all the movement in college football, you don't know how effective those rivalries are going to be, because you see some teams now, again, they switch over, and the turnover in teams is just ridiculous now, and it's a little frustrating, but I like the parity of it. But at the same time, I really would like to see, again, the blue bloods, kind of stay on top and play each other on a consistent basis. And, and I just love, again, I'm a running back, so I'm always going to side with the run. But I don't have anything against the pass. And I think it's where the game is now. You have to be able to get the ball downfield. You have to be able to throw the football. And, you have to be effective doing it. But it still comes back to you win games in the trenches. You win offense, defensive line. Those are two areas where that's going to impact the game, and you saw that across the board. Teams that were able to run the football effectively won the games in turnovers. Those are the things that you got to look at, and those are things that I'm looking for in this game. Playing Texas A&M, it brings back some memories from my senior year, and when we played them in the Cotton Bowl. Very physical game. They had, Sam Adams, Patrick Bates. They had some studs, and they had that, that defense is always, and I think that's what's going to be the matchup is, can our offense, kind of keep up with their defense, because Elko is going to put a strong defensive product on the field on a consistent basis.
Absolutely. You go back to those days of the Wrecking Crew, Quentin Coriat, Marcus Buckley. I mean, those were the days of Texas A&M at the pinnacle and height of just defensive-minded football. And to your point, I agree with that. He is going to try and confuse C.J. Carr. And I guess that's where I want to go right now, Reggie, is Coach and I have talked about this game potentially being a huge one for Notre Dame, right? They're an independent. They play an ACC type of schedule, but for the most part, they're not going to play in a conference championship. They need to step up and win this game. Or do you feel, even if they lose this game on Saturday, that they could still get back into the college football playoff mix?
I don't see how. I mean, this is a must-win for Notre Dame, and I think they got to come out with high energy and really, get the crowd going early, get a lot of the energy behind them, and get started and start fast. That was the one thing, they kind of started to come back in the second half, but Notre Dame needs to start fast in this game and not get behind. They need to get out front and put the pressure on Texas A&M to actually have to, come from behind, because I don't think they're as effective as a team when they're playing from behind. But when they're out front, they're going to pin their ears back and come after you. And don't give them the energy that they're looking for early in the game, because it's going to, you get those ebbs and flows. You don't want momentum. You don't want them to get the momentum early. Irish have to come out, be effective, running the football, and really getting after the quarterback on defense right from the word go. I need to see that Marcus, Coach Freeman, when they came out of the tunnel against A&M last year, where he was fired up, jacked up, and let's go, because the team is going to feed off of his energy.
I'm going to take it a little different direction now, too, because I know that you've been a part of college football a long time. I'm thinking 5 decades, maybe, as a player and as an NFL player, as a Heisman candidate, now as an administrator that works with these student athletes. I'm concerned a little bit. Where so many things are different. Like I began coaching as a head coach in 1983 and just now retired, and things have changed. But I'm wondering because I think of Notre Dame, and I heard that the old saying I deal with. I've never seen an unsuccessful man from Notre Dame. The old saying, and there's and a little bit of truth to that. But I worry about the experience of changing whichever school gives you the most money, jumping every year. Now your major doesn't matter as much. The quality of degree. You don't have a fight song. You don't have a school color. You don't meet your future wife. I just wonder. There's some good, yes, but I wonder where it's going now.
Again, I presented this a while back. I'm not a fan of, like I said, where we are with the portal and NIL. I do believe the players. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar business. I don't have a problem with the players getting paid. I think it needs to be more like a stipend system, and then you educate these young men and women on what these dollars can do for you. Just say say, hey, everybody gets a pool of money. And you do, say, $200,000 a year for, a full scholarship athlete. But then talk to them about, hey, we're going to work with you to invest this money. And when you leave your respective school, hopefully with a degree, you'll have, $1 million to start from. And this is without going to the league. But I just think the money that's being thrown around, and then these kids are not being really educated on the tax side of things, it winds up hurting them in the long run. And I look at Shiloh Sanders and his filing bankruptcy because these kids are not being educated on what this money means. And Uncle Sam is going to get his money. So I think you got to try to put some guardrails around it. And I think again when they added the portal, that was the most asinine thing I've ever seen. That made no sense to me because when you can bounce from one team to another. Because the one thing that people don't think about is you lose credits.
Yes.
When you transfer from one school to another, they don't always accept the credits. And, some of these kids aren't graduating. And then they go into the portal and they don't come out. And they're left with nothing. And no one's talking about that side of things. And it's hurting the game. It's hurting college athletics, period. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a way that you can do both.
I agree. And that's where I just wanted to ask you before you go is parity in college football. We've seen it, right? Across multiple divisions, across multiple conferences, including the SEC. And knowing and seeing what Kirby Smart did in Georgia just a few seasons ago, back to back, and seeing the dominance of Nick Saban for, a decade basically in Tuscaloosa. Do you think we'll see that again because of the transfer portal, because of NIL, or is it just so watered down that there's parity across the board?
Well, I think the bigger issue is the lack of commitment and some Coach Bowden was saying, there's you lose that connection. When you go through an institution, part of that process is to learn and be educated and develop as a young man, young woman, and become an adult. You're not, when you're 17, 18 year olds, you're still a child. And you can disagree with me all you want, and I don't have a problem with that. But I'll tell you right now, there's a lot for these young men and women to learn that they're not getting because they never understand the importance of commitment. They never understand the importance of being not so much loyal, but understanding that I'm going to have difficult times. I'm going to have challenges. Mm-hmm. And in those challenges, that's going to help me grow as a person. You need to be developing as a human being, not just as an athlete. And, okay, let me make as much money as I can. Because the money is, at the end of it, the money is not what's going to make you happy. It's the relationships that you build, the connections that you make. And like I said, I met my wife at Notre Dame. We've been married for over 30 years now. And that's my best friend. But she was a tutor. So there are things that you don't get because you're not getting money. Because again, when we were back, we didn't get paid. And I had a problem with it from an administrative standpoint because you couldn't give a kid a pizza, which was crazy to me. So there's a balance that can be had to where you're not giving kids millions of dollars that they're not ready for, but also being able to give them an education beyond just, the degrees that they go to class for. There's education that you can develop as an athlete, as being a human being, as developing compassion for others, and being like I said, Coach always talked about being a good teammate.
Yeah.
And teammates, that doesn't just last for the time that you play together. That's in life. I still have, strong bonds with the guys that I played with. And I'm talking about, this is 30 years later, we're still brothers.
Right.
And you can't buy that.
No, you can't. Marcus Freeman's done a fantastic job with Notre Dame. We'll see how this game plays out on Saturday. Reggie, we'd love to have you throughout the regular season to see, what Notre Dame could do. It was great insight, great information. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, guys. And
Thanks,
again, I'm a big fan of yours, Coach Bowden. I think we need to get you back in the game. These young men need that insight.
That's awesome.
My dad went till he was 81. I think 70 is enough for me. But I'm gonna say this: if a kid jumps in the portal and leaves Notre Dame and he don't know that fight song, he's lost one of the greatest things there is in college football. That's all I know.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
The great Reggie Brooks, Coach. Unbelievable insight from Reggie, and you heard him. And the biggest thing for me in what he brought up about Marcus Freeman, and this goes unnoticed as well. Coaching through adversity. Let's not forget, this is a team last year that lost 16-14 to Northern Illinois, and they were saying, "Oh, he might not be the right guy." He rights the ship. They get to the college football playoff. They make a run. He plays in the national championship. And I'll say this: the MO of Notre Dame last year, 8-1 on the road or on a neutral field site. They beat 5 opponents last year, including Georgia and Penn State on a neutral field. As a head coach, that's a very difficult task to do, even at Notre Dame.
Well, and again, there's an old saying, nothing less important in life than the score at halftime. And an early loss is not even halftime. I think sometimes we forget that almost every championship year, there's a loss in there somewhere. And the championship is all about what they did after that loss. And that's so true, because you don't have too many teams that run the table and win the championship. Whether you're Ohio State or anyone, there's a loss in there that you've got to respond to. And really, that's what pulls your team together. The chemistry, the locker room, that's what makes you a champion, is that you got up off the ground. You got knocked down and you got back up. If football teaches nothing but that one thing, that when I get knocked down, my ass is getting back up off that ground and getting ready for the next challenge. And that's what we're going to see now with some of these. Notre Dame, I'm agreeable with you, and I think we heard that from Reggie. They can't lose this game.
No, they can't.
For the college football playoff.
They can't. Now, what I didn't tell Reggie is that I took the 6.5 because I want to keep. I don't want to say, "Hey, Reggie, you're right," but I'm taking the 6.5 points with Texas A&M. I just feel when you give me a team that has 2 games under their belt. Elko defensive mind. I got a quarterback that could scoot like Marcel Reed. I'll take a shot with the 6. They don't have to win it. They just have to lose by less than 6 points.
Well, and I'm with you. I think Notre Dame is more likely to win than not. But I'm taking the 6.5 points because they're going to play great. I don't care what they've done. They're going to play great defense. And I'm taking the under. I think this is going to be a running game on Notre Dame's part. It's a defensive game. And I'm taking the under, and I'm taking the 6.5 for Texas A&M. And I am very comfortable thinking that Notre Dame could come out of there with a victory.
Absolutely. And I interviewed Jeremiah Love out in the Super Bowl. Big kid, great kid, typical Notre Dame, blue collar, work ethic. Right. The whole bit. Hope he has a great game, because he's deserving to only touch the ball a limited amount in that matchup against a top 10 opponent. Had it sting a little bit, and you got to believe that the offensive staff looks to get him involved early in this matchup. 2 other big ones that I've sort of flipped on, not really flipped, but I just solidified my view. Let's go to the first one. This Clemson game, Coach, now is down to 2.5 points. Okay, and I understand it's Clemson. I understand they get off the mat. They have not covered in 2 straight weeks. Yeah. But when I look at the numbers now, okay, they've won 9 straight in the series. So you say, okay, Clemson is owned Georgia Tech. Then I go to the numbers and I say, okay, what was the last margin of victory over the last 4 games of the regular season that they played? Clemson's won by 31 points per game. All right. Now I go, all right, I have to take a step back. What am I missing here? Because now we're seeing 3.5s and 2.5s. And this is potentially with Haynes King being banged up. Now we're seeing money come in on Georgia Tech. They haven't played in Bobby Dodd Stadium since 2020. The year that they played in 2021 or 2022, that was in Atlanta, a neutral site game where DJU got, I think you were on staff there, they got the victory. I do not like the way this third down offense with Cade Klubnik is playing. They're converting less than 35%. And more importantly, Georgia Tech on third downs for a defensive perspective, giving up 29%, excuse me, one of the best in FBS. I'm rolling the dice, upset city. Give me Georgia Tech potentially outright over Clemson.
I'm with you on this one, and we've disagreed on some games this year, but I'm with you on this one too. I guess after a couple of games of watching Clemson, I'm thinking I can't tell whether Dabo was trying to convince me that Klubnik is like Trevor Lawrence or pretend that he's like Trevor Lawrence. I think there's a different level, just like a Travis Etienne, the running back situation. When you start comparing this team to championship teams, I'm not seeing it quite as much. And right now, the way Georgia Tech is playing, the physicality of that football team, the confidence that they have in their head coach as being a Georgia Tech guy. You know, he played for old George O'Leary, and they were tough back then. I think they were top. They were 10 wins years, 3 years in a row back then. They were studs. Now, I'm telling you, because I remember back when I coached in those days down.
Reggie Ball and Godsey, when they went off against your dad, they almost knocked them off in Tallahassee.
They were good, but I feel like Georgia Tech's got that confident role right now, and their quarterback is playing well. And right now, I'm just saying, okay, without seeing any different, I just think Georgia Tech is good. And I don't think you compare 3 or 4 years back. You got different quarterbacks, different coordinators, different head coaches, and I think sometimes things just change at some point. But I tell you, the way Georgia Tech has played, especially against Colorado on the road, the way they took care of business, I just think right now playing at Georgia Tech, the confidence that they have, and I'm not sure that, I've always been a big Dabo Swinney fan. I worked with him and I worked for him, but I'm thinking right now, sometimes his motivation is so good. He convinces his players they're better. You know, he convinces his fans that they're better, and maybe they live up to it. But right now, I think Georgia Tech has got the better football team as far as being at home, and where they're playing right now and running their football program, running their scheme.
And so let me just take it a step further.
Yeah.
Clemson, from the ATS perspective, right, against any line that they have put up over the last 8 years is 7-1 overall. Right. Okay. Which offense would you want? Would you want the offense that's averaging 547 yards per game, or would you want the offense that's averaging 288 through 2 weeks? Which one would you want if I told you? Blind taste test. Which one you taking? One offense is rushing 247 on the ground and 300 through the air, or 75 yards through 2 games per game on the ground and 213 through the air. Which one you taking?
No, that's a loaded question. You know the answer there. But the thing that I see too, if Clemson gets behind Georgia, they're not going to catch up with Georgia Tech. Now I'm going to tell you that they're going to keep running that pill. They're going to be running down a hill. They're going to be moving those chains, and you're not going to go back on the field just because you want to. You're not going to see the field until they have time off the clock. And so I think that's one of those things that you have to consider also, that even that statistic is going to take yardage and total yardage away from Clemson. And right now, like I say, I'm to the point now where I got to see it. I got to see it now, and I'll say I'm wrong if they come out there and they beat Georgia Tech. But I think Georgia Tech's on a roll. I think they've got a chance to be that dark horse team in the conference. And there's a couple of others, but I think they're going to be around toward the end to have a fight for that ACC championship game.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. We're seeing what I call in the market a divergence. Everybody seems to be on Clemson, and we're seeing the line go the other way with Georgia Tech. Haynes King should play in this game. All reports from Brent Key is that he's practiced this week.
Yeah.
Only time will tell, but I agree with you. I like Georgia Tech. The other matchup where now I'm just all bought in. I was like maybe like 65% bought in, but now I'm completely bought in. And that's the game in Death Valley, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We talked about LSU winning 5 of the last 6 by an average margin of victory of 10.2 points per game. Lost this matchup to DJ Lagway in Florida last year. And I was like, Florida potentially on a revenge, obviously coming off the USF loss. Now I think they get absolutely smashed. I think there's no shot that Florida's give me the Tigers under the lights. This line is down to 7.5, but here's what I honestly believe. I've watched now the Tigers in back-to-back games, La Tech, and obviously the week 1 matchup against Clemson. And we've seen a blue-collar, vanilla type of effort, right? We saw Harlan Berry get involved last week, the freshman running back, Cade Durham. We know that the rushing attack is a little bit better this year than it was last year. Offensive line looks like it's coming together. But you have a Heisman Trophy gunslinger, right? You have an offense that could just chuck it at any given time. We haven't seen that now in 2 weeks. I think Brian Kelly's keeping everything under the vest. I think he opens it up with bombs away on Saturday night. Boom, boom, boom. I'm telling you, I think LSU, this might be a back and forth affair for a quarter or two where it's, 21 up at halftime. But I think in the second half, it's all LSU. I think they cover the line. It's down to 7.5, but I think we blow through this 49.5 total, Coach.
Yeah, I can see that, but I'm gonna think. I think Florida's gonna respond more than that, though. I'm gonna stake. I've got LSU winning the ball game, but I've got the points with Florida when it's 7.5, 6.5
Yeah,
points.
7.5.
7.5. I mean, if it drops below 7, maybe a different thought. But I with 7.5, I just think they're going to go in there. They want to turn that program back around. They let one get away from them. They're a better football team than they showed. Now they've got to coach better. They've got to knock out the penalties that they had. They've got to show maturity. They've got to do a lot of things. But Legway's a lot better than what that showed, and I think they will show up. But I think the tougher team, the better team. A team that plays better defense than they did last year, a team that runs better, a quarterback that's not going to be put in adverse situations because they can't run the football. I think LSU is the better team. But, Florida, when you go into LSU, and I've coached in LSU many times, and I've coached in the swamp, they're both very similar locations. Hot, over 100,000 people, extremely humid and hot, and you're usually playing the best athletes in the conference. Right. And they're difficult play, but the humidity, the heat, the noise, the whole atmosphere is not going to be as big a factor if you play every week in the swamp, just because of how big and how hot and how difficult it is to play down there as well. That being said, I've got a good feel for LSU this year too. I just think Florida's going to take one last stab at it. And it's not going to be enough, but it'll give them a little bit of moving back where they were awful good before they were bad, and they've been bad since last week.
So you coached back in the days. Now I remember Herb Tyler, the quarter, Kevin Falk for LSU. Oh, yeah. That Jerry DiNardo was coach. Did you coach against Curly Holman?
Curly
Holman.
My first year was against Curly. In fact, he probably lost his job because of the way at Auburn we beat them 31-28. Never scored an offensive touchdown. If you remember, his quarterback Howard, I think it was Howard.
Jamie Howard
threw three interceptions that went for touchdowns, and they fumbled back in the end zone and recovered. We recovered that one for a touchdown. And we beat them 31. We kicked one field goal and won 31-28. But that was in Auburn. Now at Clemson in Baton Rouge, it's a tough place to play. I will say that. But it's funny. I had a winning record in Baton Rouge, 2-1, and I had a losing record at Auburn. And sometimes that's just the way it goes.
It is. But we'll see exactly how that plays out. I'm all in now on LSU. Could be a best bet come later in the week. I just believe in it, and we'll see how it plays out. Now, Ole Miss and Arkansas, we have talked about this, have played some crazy games in the series. The last 10 meetings, okay, the teams have averaged 72.9 points per game. This total is in at 60.5, and people are like, well, I got burned last week. Kentucky and Ole Miss, that line was 53.5 total. They bet it down to 50.5, and it was an ugly game, right? It went right on the number. But you and I talked about it. The only way Kentucky could keep that game close is if they shorten the game. They couldn't get into a shootout with Austin Simmons. They're not built that way, right? So they made it a 4-quarter game, just didn't have enough in the tank to potentially pull it out. I think this game with both of these quarterbacks, Austin Simmons and Taylon Green, give me 100 points. I think we could get to 90, 100 easy. Last year was 63-31 in favor of Jackson Dart and Ole Miss. They routed them. Taylon Green got hurt in the first quarter of that game. But Taylon Green, I'm telling you this, Coach, he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks that you've ever heard of. 10 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's completing 72% of his passes. This offense with Bobby Petrino, the mad scientist, as you know, they're averaging 590 total yards per game. 590. 257 on the ground, 333 through the air. I'm going to take the points. Give me the points with Pete Shuey and give me the over. I'm telling you, points aplenty.
The over is going to happen. Whoever scores last is going to win this football game. I'm going to stick. I think no matter what happens, and I think the quarterback position clearly goes to Arkansas because of the Austin Simmons threw two picks last week against Kentucky and got them behind, and again they had to come back. And he could have if he has a lot of turnovers, then I'm probably going to guess this one wrong. But I've got however good the quarterback battle goes for Arkansas, I just think the explosiveness and the big play capabilities is 4.5 points better at Ole Miss. And when it's said and done, it's going to be nice. I would take the over up to the 70s, I think. I can see a 38-35 game in this football game because it's going to be high scoring, I think. But I still think when it comes down to it that he's got more weapons and more bullets at Ole Miss that can make explosive plays, whereas that quarterback is clearly better. And I usually go with the best quarterback, but I just think there's not much riding at Ole Miss. Nobody thinks they're as good as they were last year. Nobody's saying they better win this one, they better win that one. They revenged. They got Kentucky back after the loss the year before. So I do think that, and again they pounded. And that's not a good indicator, but they pounded Arkansas last year. That was ugly. But I do think they've got enough weapons at Ole Miss that they're going to score that. They're going to get the last score, and it's going to give them that 4.5, 5-point lead and victory.
It should. We'll see. Now, I'm a big believer in Sam Pittman. So let me ask you. Let me ask you this. Okay, let me take it a step further. If Arkansas strikes the upset,
right?
Contender, maybe? I mean, are we calling them now keep in mind, 5.5 win total. They were only expected to win around 5 or 6 games. They'd be 3-0 with a conference win.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at Arkansas. I mean, I think we talked about Georgia Tech in the ACC. I think of South Carolina and Arkansas and probably Tennessee and Auburn. There's a bunch of them right there, but Arkansas, I think more so than the others. I think Sam Pittman's gotten over the hump with that football team. Petrino has got his offense now clicking, and if they do win this game, look out because now the confidence level shoots right up. And I do think Sam Pittman's an outstanding coach. I am glad they have stuck with him and through the difficult times. Makes me want to talk about a whole new subject and instead of paying a coach $50 million to fire him early, take that money and give them to nothing but NILs and get the best players in the country. Instead of fire a coach and having to pay him $40 million not to coach, take the $40 million and buy the best players in America and give him the best players and see what he can do.
But that's what you and I talked about. You see, and that just goes to show like where the mindset and perception of these fan bases are. Right? Is that, think of Dabo. They gave him basically 5 years after your brother to build that foundation.
Oh, they built facilities all up.
Right. And it wasn't until they knock off LSU in the Peach Bowl with Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins that it really came to fruition. Right. The mindset of fan bases throughout the nation is win now, go big or go home. And I told you, but it's not just at Georgia and Tennessee and Auburn and LSU and Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State. It's like the Michigan States believe that. The Boston colleges believe that. Heck, now you got Tulane believe. I'm just saying the fan bases have become delusional across the landscape of college football with the evolution of, well, we're paying 150, a million for facilities. We deserve to be in the college football playoff, right?
Yeah, but it's well, I think in a lot of ways fans have always been a little delusional because fans, by the nature of the name fan, you got one team that you think is the good guys versus the bad guys. We got the best band, we got the best school colors, we got the best fight song, and we deserve to win no matter what. If we put enough money into it, we're going to win. And again, there are a lot more things involved in that, but anyway, I know it gets around. But we're talking about Sam Pittman, and they've stuck with him. And I've always thought he was a pretty good coach in a difficult situation, turning that program around and making a winner out of it. But I think they are definitely the dark horse team. A win against Ole Miss, I think that puts them in that position.
All right, let me take another game, which, you look at the line, and it's based off of what they did last week against Virginia Tech, and it's Vanderbilt, and they're catching 4.5 on the road to South Carolina. Right. And I know Pavia and that team are live. They dominated that defense by Virginia Tech last week, especially in the second half. But you're telling me a team that's been basically 4-30 all time against South Carolina has to go into Williams-Brice and win that game outright, basically? I think South Carolina smashes them on Saturday.
Yeah, I think the bubble gets burst a little bit when you look at these two teams, and because of, you've got just give them a special teams and defense. Lenore, the offense hasn't played as well as they should have played. Lenore's I don't care if the offense doesn't have a good number. He can score at any time. He can take one play and make it 7 points. Now you take the special teams they have and the points they score that way, the way they play defense, the talent level at South Carolina separates itself from Vanderbilt. Now their quarterback does a great job of running that offense, and they are more than just a team that shocks or surprises people. But again, South Carolina, there's no doubt they know exactly what they're playing against. A very good Vanderbilt team that if they don't play well, if they don't have a good defensive scheme, Vanderbilt can score points. And so I think South Carolina knows they've got a good team they're playing, and they will. This isn't Virginia Tech, this is South Carolina. And I think their quarterback's ability to make big plays, their great defense, and the special teams was going to get them. They have been getting them 7 points a game, 7 to 10 points a game will be the difference in this game. South Carolina, that whatever the points are, they're going to win that football game and cover.
It was 5.5. It's down to 4.5. We're seeing this could be a weekend, and I've said it, where it's a majority of the favorites. Now, I like LSU. I like Georgia. I like South Carolina. I think if there's one dog in the conference that I like, it is A&M plus the points. So I agree with you. 29% is a concern for South Carolina, though, not converting on third downs. Right. 2 games in, you want to see that offense with Lenore Sellers have a little more continuity going up against an SEC conference opponent, no?
Yeah, if South Carolina underperforms this year, it'll be because the offensive line has given up sacks. They're not consistent running the football, and they're not the team they need to be. With the quarterback that they've got, they should be very, very productive. And that's where they not only do they need to be improved, but the good thing is they can improve, because once they get the offense playing well, they really do become one of those teams, like they were at the end of last year. They go back to being one of those teams that can line up, and I don't care who you are, you play against them, you got a chance to lose that ball game.
I agree. So we'll see how that plays out. A couple of statistics. South Carolina, very good in run support, giving up 88 rushing yards per game. On the flip side, Vanderbilt, very balanced with that. Diego Pavia at the helm, 231 on the ground, 254 through the air. If you're looking at this Commodore defense, 81 rushing yards allowed. Secondary has played lights out, only given up 110 rushing yards per game. That's the matchup. Can Lenore Sellers attack that Commodore secondary over the top? Playing at home, I'm willing to lay the 4.5 points on the road. Couple other games, Coach. South Carolina, USF on the road against Miami. Miami 6-1 all time against the Bulls. They blew them out last year in Tampa with Cam Ward. Can they do it again? I went back and forth with this game. Offensive line, defensive line. You know what? I don't know if Miami's threatened in this game, but 17.5, even though it's back-to-back road games in state for South Florida, I'll take a shot with the 17 and a hook.
I'm with you. I've been looking at that all week. 7.5 points. A South Florida team that's got athletes, that's played athletically, that stood toe to toe with Florida athletically, and then drove that ball right down the field at the end of the game to win the game. They have to be reckoned with as a team with talent. And you got to remember, as a group of 6 team, they're sitting in Tampa, Florida. They're sitting in a hotbed of athletes around the part of Florida that they are. They have good football players. And so again, they played high school ball just like against Florida. They grew up playing against those kids from Miami. Most of those kids in Miami and in South Florida are from the state. And those guys played against them all their lives. And at South Florida, most of their guys were not offered by Florida or Miami or Florida State. There's always that chip. So the 17.5 is too much. So again, Miami's going to continue to win. The line's too big. I've got to go with South Florida with that kind of line. They're going to keep up with Miami.
I agree with you. And again, we'll break this game down a little bit later tomorrow. Coach and I are going to be on either Thursday or Friday with some picks. We'll also have Mark Lawrence joining us, one of the best handicappers in the business. He'll give us some numbers about some key games tomorrow or Friday, Coach. A couple other games of note just to get your take on it. We talked about Virginia Tech. They play Old Dominion this weekend. Typically, Old Dominion has been a team where when they had Gerard Evans, Vatek, they lost as a 28.5-point favorite on the road. That's when Justin Fuentes was there. But this team is 0-2. And if they lose this game to Old Dominion, they'll be 0-3. Is it possible, because they're all non-conference losses, to right the ship and at least make a run at as a head coach, if you're Brent Pry and you're facing ODU, you have to smash them, because now your back's against the wall. You could potentially lose this whole team if they start 0-3.
I don't think he makes it through the season. If he lost this game, I don't think he makes it through the season. I just think that's where they are. They'll now start to think about what we're going to do for the future. And ODU, I mean, again, they're in the Sun Belt. I've watched them when they moved to Division I not too long ago. Not quite as well as James Madison, but they started beating Power 4 teams or Power 5 teams back then right away. It's a very, very good football team. It's not one of those teams that you're just going to blow out because they're a group of 6 teams. They're very comfortable playing a team. So again, this is going to be a tough one for Virginia Tech. I do think Virginia Tech will pull this one out, but if he did not, I don't think he'll make it to the end of the season.
I agree with you. The other one that I feel like a coach is on the hot seat.
Yeah.
Get your take is, Luke Fickell 3 years ago when he squared off against Brian Kelly in the college football playoff with Des Ridder, Jerome Ford, and Sauce Gardner for Cincinnati. Could have wrote his ticket to anywhere he wanted to go. He was talking about before Lincoln Riley for the USC job. He could have went to any Power 5 conference at that particular time and gotten a boatload of money. He decides to take over for Paul Chryst. Wisconsin is what Wisconsin is. You're going to make it to potentially, back in the day, a Rose Bowl. You're never going to win a national championship, but he's not even doing that, Coach. He was under 500 last year. He 5-7 overall. They're 20.5-point dogs in Tuscaloosa. He doesn't have one more key win under his belt since he started in Madison.
Yeah, I tell you, when you get to where you can pick a school and you don't pick a school based on what their potential is down the road, you make a mistake, because Wisconsin, people don't die to go to Wisconsin in that portal. And I don't think they're throwing big bucks out there like a lot of the other teams are. And you're not going to, I mean, it's kind of like Iowa, but maybe not as good as Iowa. They're going to win, and they're going to run the football, and they're going to have tight ends and big backs. But they're going to be middle of the road Big Ten, and that's where it's been. And now it has a chance of going south of that. that right now if they don't do it right. But again, when in this profession, you need to make sure you think about where you're going and what the pluses and the minuses are. I've always thought that Nick Saban, when I watched his career, because we were really starting about the same time when he was at Toledo, and I watched him go, because he was an assistant coach at West Virginia after my dad left, and I was a GA for them, and I worked with him as a GA a little bit. But I think when he was at Michigan State, and after that first 3 or 4 years, they couldn't be the best team in the state. They couldn't do enough, and about got fired. Then he won 9 games. He said, you know what? I need to go where the program is committed to building a national champion. I don't care how good a coach you are. You can go to a lot of schools, and you're not going to win a championship. But if you're a Nick Saban with all the ability that he has, you give him an Alabama with their facilities and money and commitment, or an LSU, he's going to be the GOAT of all time. It's exactly what he was. You put him at Wisconsin the rest of his career, he's going to be not quite a GOAT. That's just the way it is.
Right. So let me say this about Nick Saban. I think people, too, forget the early part of East Lansing, because you're right. He didn't win, right? But he also had, at that particular time, we're talking early 90s, right? 94, 95, when he was at Michigan State. He had Cedric Irvin. He had Bill Burke, who at the time was one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten, right? Then he moved on, and he had, Gus Owenstein that transferred from Notre Dame. He had Plaxico Burress. And his claim to fame at that particular time, back in 1998, was beating Ohio State as a 28.5-point dog on the road. But at that time, people forget that they were picked as a challenger to some of the front runners in the Big Ten. At that particular time in 98, that he knocked off Ohio State, if you would have taken a preseason poll, Michigan State was a dark horse. They were supposed to be there. They just didn't get coached up. And then he decided to move to LSU and have all that great success. So sometimes, I think people forget the early part of Nick Saban's career where he did have challenges. And then obviously he stepped up and had one, best modern day coach that potentially with 6 national championships at Alabama, 1 at LSU, 7 is unprecedented in modern day.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people can take the job at Alabama and screw it up, and most of them do. But he's one that you give him a program like that. And I think that was the point I was trying to make. If you've got his ability, and it's a rare ability, he was special. There was no question. And I remember when he was in high school, my dad recruited him. I went to Monongah High School. I went and watched him play in high school when my dad was recruiting him and other people on that team. And when I was a GA at West Virginia, he was a 25-year-old secondary coach. And there was something different about him. I don't know how we got off on him, but I believe he has something special. You just needed to match him up with a program that has something special. And when you put him with LSU or you put him with Alabama, I imagine the same thing he could have done at Georgia or maybe in Oklahoma. There's some schools, he could Michigan. At Toledo, when he went there, that was one of the top programs in the MAC. You go to Akron. That was the lowest program. MAC and Akron and Kent were at the bottom, but Toledo, whatever coach is there, whether it be Matt Campbell or him, they take that Toledo job to the next level. That's what they do.
I'll say this, and I've said it time and time again. You took a program that was 2-22 at Akron. You couldn't win in the MAC. And you turned them into basically a contender and a winner. You took them to an 8-win season. You took them to their first bowl win. You beat teams like Pitt and Northwestern. They never had that success through the history. And you can go back to the days of Charlie Fry in the Rubber Bowl, right? They never had that type of success. And then since you've left, I think they're kicking themselves about where they are with Joe Moorhead, but that's for another day. In regards to Akron, I will throw you a curveball though. We talked about Tuscaloosa in Alabama, right? Oh, I'm going to take the points with Wisconsin. If you're Luke Fickell, you have to. He's got to throw the kitchen sink at Kalen DeBoer. You have to do anything to make this game a game in the fourth quarter.
I'm just saying, I don't care whether it's 29 or 49. I think Alabama's going to put that many on them at home. I just think that's the way it's going to be. That I think they're going to get that ship righted. May not be right enough to beat some of the conference teams they got to play, but I still say Wisconsin doesn't have enough bullets in their gun to get that thing to score those points against Alabama. But we'll see. We'll see. I think that it would be nice if they did, but I think Alabama. I'm not sure what they're going to do the next week against Georgia. I think it is. And I looked at their schedule. They've got a bunch of those teams in the top 25. They've got to play still. Wisconsin, and I've said this, beating ULM 77-0 didn't do a thing to help him there.
No.
It's just something he had to do. Beating Wisconsin by 25 is not going to make those people happy. It's just going to be what he had to do, and hopefully he'll get better. It'll start getting kind of sporty when I think they got Georgia the next week, or they got Georgia down the road, and they got some other conference teams. That's when we'll find out if he has what it takes to be the head coach at Alabama, because it's pressure is as much as anything at Alabama.
Absolutely, and we'll see exactly what transpires this coming Saturday. Like I said, if you're Luke Fickell, you have to find something. I don't know if it's taking it down to 40 seconds on the game clock every snap to make it, a 4-quarter game. Make it ugly. They were able to do that last year against Oregon. The difference was they were in Camp Randall as opposed to Bryant-Denny, where Alabama's had great dominance even over the course of the past 15 seasons with Nick Saban, obviously, and even Kalen DeBoer. So we'll see how that game plays out. We'll be back either tomorrow or Friday. We'll be breaking down the picks for this weekend. We'll have Mark Lawrence with us, maybe some other guests throughout the nation, breaking down the pulse of some of the biggest games in the Power Four conferences. For Coach Bowden, I'm Joe Lisi. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you this weekend before kickoff.
Sounds good. See you, Joe.